In the blink of an eye, everything changed for 15-year-old Malene West. 1 second she was standing outside the battered fence at Sullivan's farm. The next, she was crashing into the dust, her body folding under her like a marionette with snapped strings. Caleb Mitchell's laughter echoed behind her, sharp and cruel as the gate slammed shut with a final metallic clank. Malene didn't even have time to scream. Across the pen, Wildfire was already moving, a force of muscle and fury, a chestnut, Mustang with a blaze of white down his proud face. A creature so wild even seasoned trainers wouldn't dare approach him. Now, it was just him and her. The boys, Caleb, Dylan, and Eric, had backed away, phones out, recording every terrifying second. In their minds, it was a perfect plan. Scare the crippled girl who dared to think she was special, humiliate her, break her. But as the dust swirled around them, something none of them expected began to unfold. Wildfire slowed. His powerful body, coiled with tension, yet he didn't charge, didn't rear. His fierce, intelligent eyes locked onto Malene's, and for a moment, a heartbeat suspended in air. The world narrowed to just the two of them, two wounded souls. Two creatures the world had labeled broken, and they recognized each other. Malene, trembling, battered, struggled to her knees. Fear clawed at her chest, screaming at her to run. But her body wouldn't obey, and even if it could, she knew instinctively that running was the worst thing she could do. Instead, she stayed perfectly still. She lifted her chin and met Wildfire's gaze head-on. "I see you," she whispered, her voice thin but steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." The Mustang snorted, pawing the ground once, twice. His ears flicked forward, uncertain. He could crush her, in seconds, trample her without hesitation. Yet something about her, maybe the stubborn glint in her hazel eyes, or the way her small, uneven body made no move to challenge him, made him pause. Outside the fence, the boys' laughter faltered. "What the hell?" Dylan muttered, his phone slowly lowering. She's talking to it?" Eric stammered. Caleb scowled, the realization dawning on him that things were not going according to plan. Inside the pen, Malene kept talking. Her words were not commands, not threats, just quiet truths spilling from a heart that had known too much judgment and too little mercy. "They think we're broken," she said, voice thick with emotion. "But they're wrong." Wildfire took a step forward, then another. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent. Fear, yes, but also something else. A raw, fierce resilience that called to the wild part of him that no human had ever touched. When he stopped just feet away, Malene dared to lift a shaking hand, palm open. "I'm not your enemy," she said, barely above a whisper. The Mustang dipped his great head lower. For a long, breathless moment, he simply breathed her in. Then, with a gentleness that made the watching boys freeze in stunned silence, he touched her hand with the velvet of his muzzle. The world seemed to hold its breath. In that touch, so light, so impossibly fragile, a bridge formed between them, a bond that defied logic, fear, and every scar life had carved into them. Malene blinked back tears. She felt it, deep and certain. This wasn't just a moment, it was a beginning. The boys outside the pen panicked. Caleb barked orders, fumbling with the gate. Get her out before Sullivan sees." In their clumsy rush, they startled Wildfire. The great horse tossed his head, whinnying sharply. His body tensed, ready to defend. Malene reacted instantly. "No!" she cried, throwing herself between Wildfire and the open gate. "You're safe! You're safe!" Her body was screaming in protest, every muscle trembling, her left leg dragging uselessly behind. But she moved with a desperate urgency. Somehow, she reached the gate before Wildfire could bolt. She slammed it shut just as headlights swung into the driveway, sweeping the scene in harsh, unforgiving light. A truck door slammed. "What in God's name is going on here?" Mark Sullivan's voice boomed across the yard. Another figure rushed forward. Joseph West, Malene's grandfather, his face stricken with horror. "Malene?" His voice cracked. "Child, what have they done to you?" Malene tried to answer, but the world tilted. Her strength, spent and scattered like leaves in the wind, abandoned her. She collapsed against the fence as the edges of her vision blurred into darkness. The last thing she heard before slipping away was the soft, worried nickering of Wildfire standing guard at her side. The steady beep of a heart monitor pulled Malene West back to consciousness. The sterile white walls, the bright fluorescent lights. It took a long, disoriented moment for her to realize she was in a hospital. Her body ached everywhere. A dull, deep soreness layered over sharper stings and the raw exhaustion that seemed to weigh her down like chains. "Maddie?" Her mother's voice, trembling, desperate, cut through the haze. Rachel West sat beside the bed, her face drawn and pale with worry, dark circles shadowing her eyes. Behind her, Grandpa Joseph stood by the window, his hat in his hands, looking older than Malene had ever seen him. "Mom," Maddie croaked, her throat raw. What happened?" Rachel leaned in, her hand brushing Maddie's hair from her forehead. "We found you unconscious at Sullivan's farm, sweetheart, by Wildfire's pen. Wildfire." The name jolted her, memory like a lightning strike. Caleb, the boys, the terrifying seconds inside the pen, the Mustang. Malene tried to sit up. Pain flared through her side, making her gasp. "Easy," Joseph said, crossing the room in 2 strides. "Doctor said you've got bad bruising, a strain in your left side. No concussion, thank God. But Wildfire," Maddie rasped. "Is he?" Rachel and Joseph exchanged glances, puzzled. "You're asking about the horse?" Rachel said, disbelief flashing through her exhaustion. "Maddie, you could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Maddie insisted, forcing herself upright against the bed's stiff pillows. "He didn't hurt me, he understood me." Before Rachel could answer, the door opened. A doctor entered, brisk and no nonsense. "Good to see you awake, Malene," she said, scanning the monitors. "I'm Dr. Torres. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Maddie admitted. "Understandable. We'll keep you for observation until this afternoon. No sign of internal injuries, just heavy bruising and strain from the fall." She smiled kindly. "You're a lucky girl." Maddie didn't feel lucky. She felt changed. As soon as the doctor left, Rachel leaned in, her voice low and fierce. "The sheriff wants to talk to you. He's questioning those boys now." Malene's stomach twisted. "They're lying, aren't they?" she whispered, "saying I went in on my own." Joseph's face darkened. "That's right. Caleb Mitchell claims you wanted to prove yourself with the Mustang. Says they tried to stop you." "That's a lie." Maddie's voice broke. "They pushed me." Dylan was recording, and there has to be video. Rachel's mouth tightened. Conveniently, Dylan's phone broke. No footage. It's 3 of them against you. Maddie's heart sank. She knew the odds. Knew how easily people believe the golden boy athlete over the disabled farm girl. But then Joseph said quietly, "Mark Sullivan believes you." Maddie blinked. "He says there's no way you could have climbed that gate yourself." And Joseph hesitated, exchanging another look with Rachel. "He says Wildfire hasn't let a single soul near him since arriving. Until you." Maddie felt tears burn her eyes. Not from fear, but from something fiercer. Hope. The door swung open again. Sheriff Patterson entered, a heavy-set man with tired eyes but a reputation for fairness. He pulled up a chair. "Feeling up to answering a few questions, Miss West?" For 20 minutes, Malene told him everything, from Caleb's cruel bet to the terrifying moments in the pen. She left nothing out. When she finished, the sheriff sat back, his face unreadable. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "Problem is, no evidence, and 3 boys telling a different version." "So you'll just believe them?" Rachel snapped, her voice sharp. "I didn't say that." Patterson rubbed his jaw. "Look, I've known Caleb since he was a kid. Never trusted him much. But without proof?" He shook his head. "It's tough." Maddie fought back a sob. She wouldn't cry. She would not cry. "What about Wildfire?" she asked. "Mark said he's different now. Calmer." Sheriff Patterson tilted, his head studying her. "Horses are unpredictable. Maybe you got lucky." "No," Maddie said, her voice shaking with conviction. "It wasn't luck. He understood me." Rachel started to argue, but Joseph placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Mark says the Mustang's been standing at the gate all morning, he said. Like he's waiting for someone. Rachel frowned. Coincidence? Maybe, Joseph said quietly. Or maybe not. Later that evening, back at the farm, Malene lay awake in her small bedroom staring at the cracked ceiling. Every movement ached, but her mind raced. Downstairs, she heard low voices, her mother, her grandfather, discussing what had happened, discussing what might happen next. She didn't need to hear every word to know one thing. They were scared. Scared for her future, scared for the farm, and Maddie, she was scared too. But even deeper than the fear was a strange, glowing certainty. She wasn't done. Something had begun in that pen. Something powerful. Something real. Wildfire was still out there, waiting. And Malene West had every intention of finding out just how far this bond between a broken girl and a wild Mustang could go. 2 days later, Malene West stood once more at the edge of Wildfire's pen, the morning air crisp and sharp against her skin. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from fear but from the sheer weight of what was about to happen. Today, she wasn't here by accident. Today, she had chosen to return. Joseph West stood nearby, arms crossed, his weathered face carved with both pride and worry. Mark Sullivan leaned against the fence, his cowboy hat pulled low, studying both girl and horse with a trained eye. You don't have to do this, Joseph said quietly. Not to prove anything to anyone. Maddie nodded once. I'm not doing it for them, she said. I'm doing it for him. Inside the pen, Wildfire watched her intently, his ears flicking forward. His powerful frame, once tense and wary, now held a different energy. Alert, curious, almost expectant. It had been the same each time she visited these past 2 days. He would see her, and something in him would soften, like a door barely cracked open. Today, she would try to step through it. Mark checked the latch one more time. We'll keep the session short. No sudden moves. You get even a whisper of bad vibes, you get out. Understood? Understood, Maddie said. Taking a slow, steady breath, she pushed open the gate and stepped inside. The sound of the latch clicking behind her was sharp as a gunshot in the cold morning air. No turning back now. Maddie moved carefully, each step deliberate, speaking softly as she approached. Hey boy, it's just me. Same as always. Wildfire snorted, tossing his head once. His muscles rippled under his coat, and for a heartbeat she saw the wildfire he was named for. Raw, unpredictable power. But then, he stilled. His ears swiveled forward, his body relaxing almost imperceptibly. Maddie slowed her pace even more, giving him time, giving both of them room to breathe. Joseph and Mark watched from outside the pen, every muscle in their bodies coiled, like springs, ready to leap in if things went wrong. But nothing went wrong. Wildfire took a step toward her, then another. His hooves made soft thuds in the dirt, each one echoing like a drumbeat in Maddie's chest. When he was just an arm's length away, Maddie stopped. She lowered her eyes, keeping her body loose, non-threatening. Slowly, she extended her right, hands palm up, fingers open. A silent invitation. The moment stretched taut between them, fragile as spun glass. Then, with infinite care, Wildfire stretched his neck forward and touched his muzzle to her hand. The world seemed to hold its breath. Joseph exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between relief and awe. Mark muttered something under his breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe just disbelief. But Maddie heard none of it. In that instant, nothing else existed, not the fear, not the past, not her body's betrayals, only the connection between a wounded girl and a wounded horse, two beings who had been written off, misunderstood, discarded, and who now found in each other something neither had known they needed: trust. Good boy, Maddie whispered, her throat tight with emotion. Good boy. Wildfire huffed against her hand, a warm, living weight. He didn't move away. He chose to stay. Tears stung Maddie's eyes, but she didn't blink them away. She let herself feel it, every raw, overwhelming piece of it. Behind her, she heard Joseph's voice, thick with pride. "It's her mother's gift," he said to Mark. "Clara could do this too before the accident." Maddie didn't move. She didn't dare break the fragile magic of the moment. "I'll be back tomorrow," she whispered to Wildfire, stroking the soft spot between his nostrils and eyes. "And the next day, and the next, we're going to do this together." The Mustang nickered softly, almost like an answer. Maddie laughed under her breath, a shaky, disbelieving sound. It felt like a miracle. Maybe it was. When she finally backed away, Wildfire followed her to the gate, his gaze steady, unafraid. Mark opened the latch just enough for her to slip out. He didn't say anything, just tipped his hat back and whistled low. Joseph clapped her gently on the shoulder, his hand lingering in silent support. As they drove home, the old truck bouncing down the gravel road, Maddie stared out the window, still half lost in the enormity of what had just happened. "You know what this means, don't you?" Joseph said from the driver's seat. Maddie turned, frowning slightly. "What?" "It means that Horse has picked you." "Picked me?" Joseph nodded, his weathered hands loose on the steering wheel. "Some horses, the good ones, the ones with real heart. They don't let just anyone in. You don't choose them, Malene, they choose you." Maddie sat back, the words sinking deep into her bones. Wildfire had chosen her. Not despite her limp, her tremors, her so-called weaknesses. Because of them. Because he understood. Because they both knew what it meant to be called broken, and to be anything but. As the farm came into view, its weathered buildings and fields stretching under the wide Stonybrook sky, Maddie felt something shift inside her. A fierce, unshakable certainty. This wasn't just about saving Wildfire. It was about saving herself, and this was only the beginning. The next morning, Maddie woke before sunrise, her body aching but her spirit electric. Today was different. Today she wouldn't just touch Wildfire. Today she would work with him. At breakfast, Rachel eyed her daughter warily across the table. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked, setting down her coffee. Maddie lifted her chin. "Ready or not, it's time." Rachel opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. There was a fire in Maddie's eyes she hadn't seen in years, maybe never. Joseph was already waiting by the truck when Maddie stepped outside. He tossed her a small bag of apples with a knowing smile. "Peace offerings," he said, "for the king." The ride to Sullivan's farm was quiet, the kind of silence that vibrated with purpose rather than fear. When they arrived, the morning mist still clung to the ground, swirling around Wildfire's pen like a living thing. The Mustang stood by, the fence, ears pricked, waiting. He knew. Maddie could feel it deep in her bones. Mark Sullivan joined them, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. "You've got half an hour before the vet shows up to do the check-in," he said. "Let's see what you can do, no pressure." Maddie laughed softly under her breath, more exhilarated than nervous. She stepped into the pen without hesitation. The world outside the fence faded away. It was just her and Wildfire now. "Morning, handsome," she murmured, holding out an apple. Wildfire approached with that same fluid grace, his dark eyes locked onto hers. He sniffed the apple, then, with surprising gentleness, took it from her palm. Joseph and Mark exchanged a glance but said nothing. They didn't have to. Maddie set to work, moving slowly, guiding Wildfire through simple exercises they had. Rehearsed with body language alone. A step forward, a step back, a turn. At first he hesitated, tossing his head, pawing the ground in frustration. The old Wildfire still burned under his skin. But Maddie didn't push. She invited. She waited. She believed. And little by little, Wildfire responded. He mirrored her steps, first clumsily, then with growing confidence. He circled her in wide loops, always keeping one wary eye on her. But he stayed. He chose to stay. By the time the vet's truck crunched down the gravel driveway, Maddie and Wildfire were standing side by side, breathing as one. Mark let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "She's not training him, she's partnering with him." The vet, Dr. Carter, climbed out of his truck carrying a clipboard and an expression of mild skepticism. "Morning, folks," he said. "Let's see this so-called miracle horse." Maddie stayed in the pen as Dr. Carter approached the fence. She didn't need to look to feel Wildfire's tension rise. The Mustang's body stiffened, his ears pinned. "Easy," Maddie whispered, laying a hand lightly on his shoulder. "I've got you." For a long moment, Wildfire stood frozen between fight and flight. Then, slowly, impossibly, he lowered his head. The vet raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Most horses with his history would have bolted the second they saw me," he said. Mark chuckled. "He's not most horses, and she's not most people." "Doctor." Carter conducted the examination from outside the pen, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. By the end, he shook his head in amazement. "Heart rate steady, no signs of aggression. If I didn't know his file, I'd say this horse had been handled since he was a foal." Joseph clapped Maddie gently on the back. "You did good, Malene girl," he said, his voice rough with pride. Maddie barely heard him. Her focus was still on Wildfire, her heart full to bursting. She had earned his trust, not through force, not through fear, but through patience, respect, and unwavering belief. And now she had to protect it. As they were packing up to leave, a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop near the barn. The door opened and out stepped Robert Mitchell, crisp and polished as ever. Maddie stiffened instinctively. Nothing good ever came from a Mitchell visit. Robert approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said smoothly. "Heard some interesting things about this Mustang." Mark crossed his arms. "News travels fast." "Small town," Mitchell replied, his gaze flickering to Maddie, then to Wildfire. "Rumor is, you've got yourself a little miracle here." Maddie said nothing. She knew better than to trust anything about this man. Robert turned to Mark, his tone casual but calculated. "Just thinking, a horse like that could be a liability. Imagine if he got loose. If he hurt someone." Mark's jaw tightened. "He's not dangerous." Robert smiled thinly. "Maybe not today." He shrugged. "Just looking out for the community. After all, there are liabilities, and then there are lawsuits." Maddie's blood turned cold. This wasn't about safety. This was about power. Control. Robert didn't care about Wildfire. He cared about land, about leverage, about winning. And if that meant getting rid of Wildfire, and by extension the West family, he would. Without blinking, Maddie met his gaze, unflinching. "You can threaten us all you want," she said quietly, "but you can't break what you don't understand." Robert's smile faltered for just a second, just long enough for Maddie to see it. Fear, not of Wildfire. Of her, the girl he had dismissed, the girl he had tried to crush, the girl who had stood up again and again and refused to fall. Without another word, Robert turned and strode back to his SUV, the door slamming shut with a final angry thud. Maddie watched him go, her heart hammering in her chest, not from fear but from the rush of standing her ground. Beside her, Joseph let out a low chuckle. "That's my girl," he said, pride lighting his face. Maddie reached out and touched Wildfire's warm neck. No matter what came next, the threats, the lies, the battles ahead, they would face it together. Girl and Mustang, outcasts no more. Just two survivors who had found something stronger than fear. Each other, and this was only the beginning. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of hope and uncertainty. Maddie spent every spare moment at Sullivan's farm, working with Wildfire, their bond deepening with every careful step, every shared breath. But beyond the fences, something darker was moving. Whispers, doubts, plans being laid in shadowed rooms. It started with small things. A local paper running an anonymous letter questioning the safety of wild, unstable animals, so close to residential areas. A concerned citizen petitioning the county board to review Sullivan's farm licenses. Little pinpricks, individually harmless but together weaving a net of pressure. Mark Sullivan was no fool. He called a meeting one evening, gathering Maddie, Joseph, and Rachel around the battered kitchen table. "This isn't just about wildfire anymore," he said grimly. "It's about the land, about control, about who gets to decide what this town becomes." Rachel folded her arms. "You think it's Mitchell?" Mark nodded. "He couldn't scare us off with lawsuits. Now he's trying to turn public opinion against us." Joseph slammed his hand down on the table, the sharp crack startling in the quiet kitchen. "We're not giving up," he growled. "Not this time." Maddie sat quietly, listening, thinking. A year ago, she would have stayed silent, let the adults decide. But not anymore. "We need to show them," she said softly. "Not tell. Show." Rachel frowned. "Show them what, honey?" Maddie looked up, her hazel eyes burning with a steady fire. "That wildfire isn't dangerous. That healing is possible. That second chances matter." She hesitated, then added, "Not just for horses, for all of us." There was a beat of silence. Then Joseph smiled slowly, pride softening the hard lines of his face. "That's my granddaughter talking." Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. "You have an idea, Malene?" Maddie nodded. "We organize a public demonstration. Invite the whole town. Let them see with their own eyes." Rachel's worry flared immediately. "It's too risky. One wrong move." "One wrong rumor could be worse," Maddie interrupted gently. "If we stay quiet, they control the story. If we speak, if wildfire speaks, maybe we still have a chance." Mark let out a low whistle. "Girls got more guts than most men I know." Slowly, reluctantly, Rachel nodded. "If we do this," she said, "we do it carefully, on our terms." Agreements were made, dates set, phone calls placed. The next 2 weeks were a storm of preparation. Maddie worked wildfire through every scenario they could think of: crowds, noise, children darting too close, flags snapping in the wind. Wildfire startled at first, muscles coiling with old reflexes. But each time Maddie was there, calm, steady, unyielding. A lighthouse in the storm. "You trust me," she would whisper. And slowly, surely, wildfire answered, "Yes." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Robert Mitchell wasn't idle. He leaned harder on the county board. He funded concerned parent groups. He whispered poison into the ears of anyone who would listen. A dangerous horse. An irresponsible girl. A tragedy waiting to happen. But not everyone listened. Not anymore. The video of Maddie working with wildfire had spread quietly through town. People who had never given her a second glance now saw something else. Not just a disabled girl, but a horsewoman, a leader. By the morning of the demonstration, the buzz around Stonybrook was undeniable. Some came out of curiosity, some out of skepticism, some, quietly, hopefully, because they wanted to believe. When Maddie arrived at the Fairgrounds, the parking lot was already half full. Joseph met her at the gate, his old Stetson pulled low over his brow. "You ready, Malene girl?" Maddie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye turning toward her. "Ready as I'll ever be." Wildfire nickered softly from his trailer, sensing her tension, offering his own silent strength. They walked into the ring together. No halter, no lead, just trust woven like invisible threads between them. The murmur of the crowd faded into a hush. Maddie raised her hand, signaling Wildfire to circle her. The Mustang moved with fluid grace, muscles rippling under his shining coat. Not wild, not broken. Free. She guided him through exercises, each more daring than the last, weaving between cones, backing at a whisper, lowering his head on command. Every success built the tension higher, pulling the audience into their shared dance. And then, the moment she had dreamed of, Maddie stood still, arms open wide. Wildfire trotted to her without hesitation and placed his forehead against her chest. The crowd erupted, not just applause. Cheers. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes. Somewhere at the back, Maddie caught a glimpse of Caleb Mitchell, his face a complicated tangle of regret and admiration. And farther still, Robert Mitchell standing stone-faced, arms crossed, watching the tide slip beyond his control. The moment ended not with fanfare, but with Maddie dropping to one knee and whispering into Wildfire's ear, "Thank you." Later, as the sun dipped low and the fairgrounds emptied, Mark found her sitting quietly by Wildfire's paddock. "You did it, kid," he said gruffly. "Turned the whole damn town around." Maddie shook her head. "We did it," she corrected, reaching up to stroke Wildfire's velvety muzzle. Together, they had done the impossible. Not by fighting harder, not by shouting louder, but by standing tall, by trusting deeper, by showing the world that even the softest or wildest hearts could learn to trust again. The road ahead would still be rough. There would still be battles to fight. But for tonight, under the vast sky and the rising stars, Maddie West knew one thing for certain. The real victory wasn't in winning the crowd. It was in never giving up, never giving in, and never letting anyone else write her story for her. She had the pen now, and she was just getting started. The applause had barely faded before the first storm clouds began to gather, not in the sky, but in whispers, in boardrooms, in backroom deals, because Robert Mitchell wasn't a man to lose quietly, and he had just seen his careful empire begin to crack, all because of a girl he once thought too broken to matter. 2 days after the demonstration, a thick envelope arrived at the West farmhouse. Rachel found it first, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside, an official notice, legal jargon, dense and cold. At the bottom, the meaning became clear. A lawsuit, filed against Mark Sullivan, the Wests, and even Maddie herself, claiming negligence, endangerment, and operating an unauthorized animal facility. Rachel sank into a chair, the paper falling from her hands. Joseph picked it up, his weathered face darkening as he read. "They're trying to bury us in court fees," he said grimly. "Doesn't matter if they win, they just have to bleed us dry." Maddie stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, the echoes of her triumph still fresh, now curdling into something bitter and cold. Mark Sullivan called that evening, his voice rough. "I figured he'd try something. I've got a lawyer lined up, good one, but it'll be a fight." Rachel pressed a hand to her forehead. "We can't afford a fight. We can't afford not to," Joseph said quietly. "If we back down now, we lose everything. The farm, Wildfire, the future Maddie's building." Maddie listened, her chest tight with a feeling she barely recognized. Rage. Not the wild, aimless anger she'd felt before. This was sharper, focused, controlled. "Then we fight," she said. For the first time, Rachel didn't argue. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Maddie's young life. Meetings with lawyers, endless paperwork, whispers at school, some supportive, many not. "Maybe the West girl isn't as sweet as she looks," someone sneered in the hallway. "Playing with dangerous horses, bringing lawsuits down on everyone." Maddie kept her head high, but inside a different kind of fear gnawed at her. What if they were right? What if she had brought ruin to everyone she loved? One afternoon, she found herself standing at Wildfire's paddock, tears burning her eyes. The Mustang came to her immediately, pressing his head into her shoulder with gentle insistence. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered into his mane. "I thought I was, but this is different." Wildfire huffed softly, warm breath against her neck as if to say, "You're stronger than you think." Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. "You are." Maddie turned to see Caleb Mitchell, standing awkwardly a few feet away, hands jammed into his jacket pockets. "I heard about the lawsuit," he said. "Dad's furious." Maddie wiped her face quickly. "I'm not surprised." "You should be," Caleb said, his voice low. "He's scared. That's why he's doing this. You embarrassed him, exposed him." Maddie snorted. "Yeah, and now he's going to destroy us." Caleb hesitated, then said something that shocked her to her core. "Maybe not." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small USB drive, held it out like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "What's that?" Maddie asked, wary. "Proof," Caleb said, simply. "Stuff I found, emails, documents. About how Dad's been using fake permits, bribing inspectors. If the county sees this, he'll be too busy defending himself to come after you. Maddie stared at him, stunned. Why are you giving this? To me, Caleb shrugged, but his voice cracked when he said, because you were right. About everything. About who he really is, and because I'm tired of being like him. For a long moment, they just stood there, two broken pieces of the same broken town, trying to find a different way forward. Finally, Maddie reached out and took the USB. Her hand was steady. The next day, armed with Caleb's evidence, their lawyer filed a countersuit. The effect was immediate and devastating. Robert Mitchell's lawyers withdrew within a week. The county opened a full investigation into his land dealings. His influence, once so vast, so untouchable, evaporated almost overnight. When the news broke, Maddie was in the paddock with Wildfire. Joseph came running from the house, waving the newspaper like a victory flag. He dropped the case, he whooped. Mitchell dropped everything. Maddie laughed, a pure, fierce sound, and threw her arms around Wildfire's neck. The Mustang reared slightly, then settled, as if feeling her joy in his bones. They had survived. Not just survived, won. But it wasn't just about lawsuits, or land, or horses. It was about standing up, about choosing to be more than what the world expected. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars blink to life, Rachel turned to Maddie. You know, she said quietly, you didn't just save the farm, you saved all of us. Maddie shook her head, smiling through tears. We saved each other. Across the fields, Wildfire lifted his head, sensing her gaze even from a distance. Spring came early to Stonybrook that year, washing the fields in a soft green and setting the creeks to singing. Life at the West Farm blossomed too, busier than it had ever been. Calls, emails, letters poured in daily from across the country. Everyone wanted to know about the Mustang Whisperer. Maddie spent her mornings in the training arena, her afternoons answering questions from journalists and researchers, and her evenings riding through the fields with Wildfire beneath her. Free and easy, like the girl she had never dared to believe she could be. The lawsuit had ended. The town had changed. But even as the farm bloomed back to life, Rachel West watched the horizon with wary eyes. Because the world beyond Stonybrook had noticed, and not everyone who came knocking would have Maddie's best interests at heart. It started small. A talent agent left a glossy card after one of Maddie's public workshops. A producer from a streaming platform called about a documentary. A flashy equestrian academy in California offered her a full scholarship, all expenses paid. Rachel handled most of the calls at first, shielding Maddie, wanting her daughter to stay focused on what mattered. The horses, the work, the heart of it all. But Maddie was 16, standing on the edge of the rest of her life, and the world was offering her glittering things she'd never dared dream of. One evening, after another thick envelope arrived, Maddie sat at the kitchen table, a frown creasing her forehead. It's not just one academy, Mom, she said, flipping through the glossy brochure. It's 3, and a documentary, and a book deal offer. Rachel stirred the pot of stew on the stove with unnecessary force. You don't need any of that to be who you are. Maddie hesitated. I know, but maybe I could do more. Help more horses, reach more people. Joseph, sitting quietly by the window, spoke up. Just remember, Maddie girl, he said, his voice slow and sure. Not all shiny things are gold, and not all opportunities are blessings. Rachel turned from the stove, her face lined with worry. Some people, she said, they'll want to own your story, your pain, your triumph. They'll wrap it in their packaging and sell it like it's theirs. And once you give it away, you can't ever take it back. Maddie looked down at the brochures, the smiling faces, the promises of fame, success, bigger barns, shinier arenas, and then she thought of Wildfire, of the dusty paddock, of the way he had touched her hand with trembling trust when no one was watching. Fame hadn't built that. Patience had. Understanding had. She pushed the brochures away. "I'm not ready," she said simply. Rachel's shoulders sagged with relief, but Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "One day you might be," he said, "and when you are, you'll know how to do it on your own terms." The world outside didn't slow down. At school, Maddie found herself the subject of whispered admiration and quiet resentment. Not everyone celebrated her success. "You think you're better than us now?" sneered Brittany Wells one afternoon by the lockers. "No," Maddie said calmly, gathering her books. "I know I'm better than I was." The answer stunned Brittany into silence. Maddie walked away, her limp barely noticeable, her head held high. "Caleb caught up with her in the hallway, you know," he said, half grinning. "You're getting kind of scary." Maddie laughed. "Good. Maybe people will stop underestimating me." "Not a chance," Caleb said, his voice turning serious. "People like that, they need to feel bigger than someone else. Doesn't matter how much you accomplish. They'll find something to pick at." Maddie nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep giving them less to pick at," she said. They shared a rare smile, not friendship, not yet, but something that hinted at it. But even as Maddie grew stronger, new challenges loomed on the horizon. Wildfire's growing fame brought more than just admirers. It brought threats. One evening, while Maddie brushed Wildfire under the wide oak by the paddock, a black SUV rolled slowly up the long gravel drive. Rachel and Joseph emerged from the house immediately, tension clear in their stiff postures. A man stepped out of the vehicle, sharply dressed, his smile sharp too. "Malene West," he called, like he already owned her name. "I'm Jackson Cross," he said, striding forward, hand extended. "Scout for the National Equestrian Performance League." Maddie didn't move to shake his hand. "I know who you are," Joseph said grimly from the porch, "and we're not interested." Jackson laughed lightly, like they'd made a charming mistake. "You might want to reconsider," he said. "Offers like this don't come around twice." He looked at Maddie then, his gaze assessing. "You've got something special, something raw. We could polish it. Make you and your Mustang my stars. National tours, six-figure contracts." Maddie heard the words, but they bounced off something inside her that had already solidified. Wildfire wasn't a product, and neither was she. She met Jackson Cross's calculating smile with a steady gaze. "I'm not for sale," she said. Cross's smile flickered. "Careful," he said lightly. "Fame's like a tide. You either ride it or get pulled under." He turned back to his SUV, climbing in with the casual grace of a man used to getting what he wanted. The black car rolled away, kicking up dust. Maddie watched it go, her heart hammering. Not from fear, but from certainty. The bigger the waves she made, the bigger the sharks who would come circling. But she wasn't the same girl who had once been thrown into a Mustang's pen and left for dead. She was stronger now, and she had Wildfire at her side. Whatever tide was coming, they would face it together. The letter arrived on a windswept Thursday, tucked between the electric bill and a local seed catalog. At first, Rachel almost threw it away. The envelope was plain, stamped with the logo of some National Horse Association she didn't recognize. But something, maybe the weight of the paper, maybe the whisper of fate, made her pause. She opened it at the kitchen table, her hands steady but her heart racing. When she read the first line, she gasped. Maddie, entering from the porch, froze at the sound. "Mom, what is it?" Rachel's eyes were wide as she held out the letter. You've been invited," she said, voice trembling, "to the National Mustang Showcase in Denver." Maddie blinked. "The showcase? The one where they bring in wild Mustangs? From around the country. The best trainers, the best riders." Rachel nodded, unable to find words. It wasn't just a competition. It was the competition. The highest honor for anyone working with wild horses. And they had chosen her. Not out of pity, not out of charity, because they had seen what she and Wildfire could do, and they believed it mattered. That night, the family gathered around the worn kitchen table, the letter lying like a fragile treasure between them. "You'd compete against Professionals, Joseph said thoughtfully, tapping the paper. Men and women who've been training horses for decades. Maddie nodded, her fingers tracing the edges of the invitation. I know. And the showcase, Rachel added carefully. It's public, honey. Media, sponsors. Pressure like you've never faced. Maddie said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the wind stirred the early spring blossoms, tapping against the windows like ghostly fingertips. Finally, she spoke. When they threw me into Wildfire's pen, she said quietly, they thought they'd break me, but instead I found my strength. She looked up, eyes bright with something fierce and unshakable. I'm not hiding anymore. Not from bullies, not from the world. Rachel wiped a tear away, pretending to fuss with a napkin. Joseph smiled, proud and sad all at once. You'll need a team, he said practically. Transport, entry fees, gear. We'll figure it out, Maddie said. For the first time, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt inevitable. The next few weeks blurred into a flurry of preparation. Joseph called in old favors. Mark Sullivan loaned his heaviest trailer. Even Caleb pitched in, helping clean tack and mend fences between his shifts at the local co-op. The town buzzed with quiet excitement. Not everyone approved. Some still whispered about that crippled girl and that dangerous horse, but for the first time their voices were a minority. Most were proud, hopeful, ready to see Stonybrook's girl take on the world. The night before they left, Maddie stood alone in Wildfire's paddock, the stars stretching endless and cold above them. She stroked his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and hay and earth. You ready for this? She whispered. Wildfire nudged her shoulder gently, his breath warm against the chill. They had come so far together. But tomorrow would be the true test, not of tricks or polished routines, of heart, of trust, of whether the connection forged in fear and pain could shine bright enough to light the way through a storm. The journey to Denver took 2 days, 2 long days of bouncing over back roads and interstate highways, of motel breakfasts and worry gnawing at the edges of excitement. When they finally pulled into the showcase grounds, a sprawling complex of arenas, barns, and temporary corrals, Maddie felt a surge of awe. Trucks and trailers from across the country lined the dusty lots. Horses snorted and pawed, some nervous, some indifferent. And the people, real professionals, trainers whose names she had read in magazines. Maddie swallowed hard. Remember, Joseph said, squeezing her shoulder, they're just people, same as you. But they're... Maddie gestured helplessly. Famous, experienced. They have money, sponsors. And you have Wildfire, Joseph said simply. That's worth more than all the ribbons and endorsements in the world. Rachel, unloading tack from the truck, added quietly, and you have yourself. Maddie looked at her mother, at her grandfather, at the only 2 people who had believed in her before anyone else did. She took a deep breath, the dry mountain air burning sweet in her lungs, and she stepped forward. The stables assigned to competitors were buzzing with energy. Maddie led Wildfire carefully to their assigned stall, conscious of the curious looks they attracted. Some were admiring, some skeptical. A few, pitying. She ignored them all. They didn't know the fire that lived inside the Mustang she led, or the one that lived inside her. By evening, she'd met her competition, a sleek young woman from Arizona, sponsored by a major feed company, a grizzled cowboy with silver hair and a handshake like sandpaper, a famous trainer from California who barely glanced at Maddie before dismissing her with a smirk. She could feel it in the air, the way they underestimated her, and strangely, that steadied her nerves. Underestimation had always been her secret weapon. Let them think she was fragile. Let them think Wildfire was uncontrollable. They would learn. Oh, they would learn. As night fell and the showcase grounds settled into uneasy sleep, Maddie sat by Wildfire's stall, stroking his warm flank. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin, not against the other trainers, against fear. Against doubt, against every voice that had ever told her she wasn't enough. Wildfire nickered softly, shifting his weight to press closer. "I know," Maddie whispered. "Tomorrow we show them. Not because we need their approval. Not because we have something to prove, but because we can." Above them, the Colorado stars blazed. Tomorrow, the world would watch. And this time, Maddie West was ready to be seen. The first morning of the showcase dawned sharp and cold. Maddie dressed carefully in the trailer's cramped quarters. Her best pair of jeans, a crisp navy shirt, boots polished until they almost shone. No glitter, no fancy embroidery. Just quiet strength. Across the grounds, trainers bustled, warming up their horses, adjusting saddles, murmuring instructions. Tension crackled in the air like dry lightning. Wildfire stood alert at the edge of his stall, ears flicking toward the sounds of competition. "Ready, boy?" Maddie whispered, pressing her forehead lightly against his. He huffed in reply, not nervous, not excited, focused, waiting. Like always, she thought, it was her job to match him, not the other way around. Their assigned event was in a smaller arena, the Liberty Challenge, where horse and human moved together without ropes, halters, or saddles. Just trust. Maddie led Wildfire into the holding area and immediately felt eyes on her. Whispers, pointing. Some recognized her, the disabled girl who had tamed the untamable Mustang. Others stared at her uneven gait, at the careful way she managed her left side. She ignored them. Let them underestimate. It was almost comforting now. "West, you're up next," called the event coordinator. Maddie nodded, heart hammering but face calm. She led Wildfire to the gate and waited. Ahead of her, a trainer from Texas was finishing his round, his Mustang circling dutifully, a precise but mechanical performance. Polite applause greeted him as he bowed and exited. Then a pause. The announcer's voice rang out. "Next, representing Stonybrook, Maryland, Malene West and her Mustang, Wildfire." A wave of adrenaline hit her, hot, dizzying. Maddie inhaled deeply, steadied herself. The gate swung open. They stepped into the arena together. The world outside the fence fell away. There was only the sand beneath her boots. The cool morning, air filling her lungs, and Wildfire moving beside her like a shadow. Maddie unclipped his lead rope with slow, deliberate motions. Wildfire shook himself once, sending a shiver down his powerful frame. But he stayed close. She took a step away. He followed. No commands, no whip, only trust. They moved together in a slow spiral, Maddie's limp barely noticeable, Wildfire adjusting subtly to match her pace. A murmur ran through the stands, not mockery, but awe. Other trainers barked orders, cracked lariats, used treats or threats. Maddie used nothing but her heart. Wildfire responded as if they shared one mind. She lifted her right hand, fingers fluttering. Wildfire reared lightly onto his hind legs, a breathless, beautiful moment of suspended power, then dropped back down with perfect grace. The crowd gasped. Even the judges leaned forward. Maddie smiled, a small, secret smile. This wasn't a trick. This was a conversation, a dance, a declaration. As she brought Wildfire to a final halt, the arena held its breath. For a long moment, horse and girl stood facing each other. Two survivors, two warriors, bound by something no words could touch. Then, Maddie raised her arm. Wildfire bowed low. The applause exploded like a summer storm, rolling across the grounds in waves. Maddie blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. They had done it. Not just performed, transcended. Back at the stables, Joseph and Rachel rushed to meet her, faces alight with pride. "You were magnificent," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. Joseph simply ruffled her hair, a rare show of tenderness. "You showed them," he said gruffly. "You showed everyone." But before Maddie could respond, a sharp voice cut through the celebration. "That was cute," sneered a woman behind them. They turned. It was the trainer from California, sleek, polished, wearing a jacket emblazoned with sponsor logos. "But let's see how your little act holds up when it actually counts." Maddie stared. At her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" The woman smiled, cold and predatory. "You're in the finals, sweetheart. Tomorrow, obstacle course challenge. No fences, no halters, just you, your horse, and a whole lot of things designed to scare the hell out of him. Rachel stiffened beside her. Joseph's face darkened. Maddie set her jaw. Good. Let it be hard. Let it test them. Because she wasn't here to win easy victories. She was here to show the world what real trust looked like. That night, as she sat by Wildfire's stall, Maddie could feel the weight of what tomorrow would bring. The obstacles were infamous. Tarps flapping like wounded birds, bridges swaying under trembling hooves, smoke machines, flags, flashing lights, traps for any horse, let alone one with Wildfire's history. One mistake, one moment of panic, and it could all collapse. Not just the competition, everything they had built. Maddie buried her face in Wildfire's mane, breathing him in. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "Just trust me, like I trust you." Wildfire's heart beat steady against hers, solid, unbroken. And Maddie knew, no matter what happened tomorrow, they would walk through that arena together. Win or lose, they had already won because trust was the real prize, and they had found it in each other. The morning of the obstacle challenge broke gray and tense. Low clouds pressed against the hills. A biting wind whipped the flags around the showgrounds into wild, snapping shapes. Perfect, Maddie thought grimly, brushing Wildfire's sleek coat. Everything about today was built to rattle even the strongest nerves. Wildfire shifted restlessly in his stall, picking up on the electricity in the air. "Easy, boy," Maddie murmured, smoothing his forelock back from his eyes. "You and me. Like always." Rachel and Joseph hovered nearby, silent but solid. No speeches, no last-minute advice, just presence. The kind of love that didn't need words. At the competitors' meeting, the officials spelled it out, a maze of unfamiliar objects, a wooden bridge that creaked underfoot, tarp-covered trenches, smoke puffs, triggered by motion sensors. Giant fluttering banners hung low across the path, and no ropes, no whips, no leads. You either had trust or you didn't. Maddie studied the course map with narrowed eyes. Beside her, the sleek trainer from California smirked. "Better hope your little miracle horse doesn't spook," she said sweetly. "They'll have the vet on standby, just in case." Maddie ignored her. Let her talk. Words were cheap. Today only. Actions mattered. They were third to go. From the warm-up area, Maddie watched the first competitor, a seasoned cowboy with a massive gelding, crash out at the tarp trench. The horse refused to cross, trembling, eyes rolling white. The buzzer sounded, and the cowboy led him out, cursing under his breath. The second rider fared no better. Smoke triggered near the bridge, and her Mustang bolted, escaping the course entirely. Another disqualification. Maddie inhaled slowly, deeply. 2 out. More would fall. The course wasn't designed to test tricks. It was designed to expose the cracks. Number 18. Maddie West and Wildfire. "To the gate, please." Her stomach twisted, but her legs carried her forward. Wildfire walked calmly at her side. No lead rope needed. Muscles loose, eyes sharp. At the gate, Maddie paused, resting her hand briefly on his neck. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "You just have to trust me." She unclipped the halter, stepped away. Wildfire stood still, waiting. The buzzer blared. They entered the course. The first obstacle, a forest of hanging flags. Wildfire flicked his ears, wary, as the cloth snapped and popped in the wind. Maddie slowed her pace, moving deliberately through the gauntlet. She didn't tug at him. Didn't coax. She just invited him forward. Wildfire hesitated, then pressed after her, brushing through the banners, flinching but following. Cheers rippled from the stands. 1 down. Next came the bridge, wide but worn, groaning with each gust of wind. Maddie approached it without hesitation, stepping onto the wood herself. She knew the sound, the sway, would trigger every instinct in Wildfire's bones to flee. She stopped halfway across and turned to face him. Waited. Across. The gap! Wildfire snorted, pawed the dirt once. Then with agonizing slowness he placed one hoof on the bridge. The old wood creaked, Wildfire's nostrils flared. But Maddie didn't move, didn't beg. She simply waited, solid, patient, certain. Another hoof, another step. With a final surge of will, Wildfire crossed the bridge. When his front hooves touched solid ground beside her, Maddie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. 2 down. The tarp trench loomed next, shiny plastic covering a shallow pit, the surface rippling and shifting like false water. Wildfire balked immediately, head high, muscles bunching. The crowd murmured. A few officials leaned forward, pens ready to mark a refusal. Maddie crouched low, one hand brushing the tarp. She didn't pull, she didn't push. She just showed him. It's safe. Wildfire sidestepped nervously, but Maddie stayed low, steady, unafraid. Finally, with a grunt of effort, the Mustang leaped awkwardly across the trench, clearing it in one bound. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polished, but it was trust, and that was worth more than any perfect score. The last trial, the smoke gate, twin pillars vented white mist. Across the path, thick, disorienting, smelling faintly chemical. Wildfire froze. The crowd held its breath. This was where even the best horses panicked. Maddie could barely see through it herself, but she kept her voice low and even. "It's okay," she murmured. "We'll go together." She walked first, into the swirling mist, blind and exposed. For a terrible second she thought Wildfire might refuse, might leave her to stumble alone. Then she heard it. The soft thud of hooves. Behind her, he had followed. Blind trust, perfect faith. They emerged from the smoke together, Maddie coughing, Wildfire shaking out his mane, both of them alive and shining with the raw, fierce joy of surviving. The final buzzer sounded, the announcer's voice cracked with emotion. An incredible display of partnership from Maddie West and Wildfire. The stands erupted. People were on their feet, clapping, shouting. Joseph pounded the rail with both fists, shouting himself hoarse. Rachel wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. Even the other trainers, even the ones who had sneered, stood in grudging admiration. Maddie dropped to one knee in the sand. Arms flung around Wildfire's neck, he huffed against her hair, nipping her shoulder lightly. His own way of saying we did it. And they had, no matter what the judges decided. They had already won. But as Maddie stood to lead Wildfire out of the arena, she caught sight of a man near the judges' table, a stranger in a dark suit murmuring urgently into a phone. She frowned. Something about him set her teeth on edge, and somewhere deep in her chest, a knot of unease began to form. The showcase wasn't over yet, and neither were the battles to come. The whisper heard. Around the Fairgrounds, the midday sun blazed high over the Stonybrook County Fair, gilding everything it touched with a fierce, buzzing light. The scent of kettle corn, hay, and fried dough hung heavy in the air, carried by bursts of laughter and the occasional lowing of cattle. Somewhere beyond the main exhibition arena, a loudspeaker crackled, calling competitors to their events. Behind the staging tent, Maddie tightened Wildfire's halter, her fingers deft despite the knot of nerves in her stomach. She caught her reflection in a dusty metal panel, neatly braided chestnut hair, a navy show shirt, and the steady, determined hazel eyes that had carried her through every battle so far. "You sure you're ready for this?" Joseph asked, leading Galaxy, the once-starved Mustang mare, to stand quietly beside them. Maddie smiled. A real one, not the shaky pretense of confidence she'd worn before. "More ready than I've ever been." The program had grown in ways none of them could have predicted, from the whispered rumors about a Mustang whisperer to a full-fledged community buzz. Today's demonstration wasn't just about Wildfire. It was about proving to Stonybrook, and maybe beyond, that the impossible could happen if you were just stubborn enough to believe. 5 minutes until showtime. Maddie exhaled, feeling the familiar tremor in her left leg and the steadiness of her right hand on Wildfire's neck. Rachel appeared from the crowd, brushing invisible dust from Maddie's sleeve. "You've got this, honey. Speak from your heart and trust him." "I always do," Maddie said, glancing at Wildfire, who stood patiently, ears flicking toward every new sound, but keeping his dark, intelligent gaze locked on her. He knew. Somehow, he always knew when it mattered most. In the stands, familiar faces were starting to gather. Sarah Reynolds holding a homemade sign that read, "Go Mustang Whisperer" in bright paint. Sheriff Patterson, Mark Sullivan. Even a few wary figures from the state agriculture office. But what froze Maddie's blood for a second was Robert Mitchell, lingering at the edge of the stands, his arms folded. There was no smirk today, only a thin, unreadable line across his face. Good, Maddie thought grimly. Let him watch. Let him see what real strength looked like. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Now entering the arena, Malene West and her Mustang, Wildfire, representing West Farm Mustang Rehabilitation. A roar of applause swept through the grandstands. Maddie took one last steadying breath, gave Wildfire a soft nudge, and stepped into the blinding light. The arena was a sea of faces, rows and rows of expectant eyes. Cameras flashed, children perched on their parents' shoulders. Somewhere up high, someone waved an American flag. Maddie's boots crunched softly on the packed dirt as she led Wildfire to the center. She turned toward the stands, lifted the towel, mic clipped to her collar, and spoke. "Good afternoon, my name is Malene West, and this is Wildfire." Her voice, though small at first, strengthened with each word. A year ago, Wildfire was considered dangerous, untamable. People said he was a lost cause. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. They said the same about me once. A ripple of murmurs stirred the crowd. But what we've learned is that sometimes, broken things aren't meant to be thrown away. Sometimes they're meant to be understood. The applause was softer this time, a different kind of energy, one that leaned forward, hung on every word. Maddie dropped the lead rope, freeing Wildfire. A gasp rippled through the stands, and Wildfire didn't bolt. He didn't rear or panic. He stayed. Maddie walked a slow circle. Wildfire matched her step for step, no ropes, no reins, only trust, invisible and unbreakable, tying them together. She crouched low, her bad leg trembling with the effort. Wildfire, responding to an unseen cue, dropped his massive head, nudging her gently with his muzzle, the way he always did when he sensed her faltering. It was not a performance. It was a conversation without words. And the whole fairground was silent, hanging on it. When Maddie rose, she spoke again, her voice raw with the weight of truth. "Wildfire isn't a problem to be solved. Neither am I. We're both possibilities." The audience burst into applause so thunderous that Wildfire twitched, his ears flicking back. Maddie smiled, reassuring him with a touch, and he settled instantly. As they finished the routine, circles, pauses, halts on voice commands only, the applause swelled, a rising tide of something deeper than admiration, respect, awe, hope. As Maddie led Wildfire toward the exit, the fair director intercepted her with a wide grin and a clipboard. "We've decided to award you the Innovation in Agriculture Prize," he said, thrusting a certificate into her hands. "And a $5,000 grant for your rehabilitation program." Maddie blinked. Wildfire snorted, shaking his mane as if he'd understood. Around them, the crowd surged forward, students, farmers, old ranchers, and city kids, all wanting to touch Wildfire, to thank Maddie, to say they'd never seen anything like it. But beyond the noise, she caught one figure slipping away. Robert Mitchell. His face shadowed, his hands clenched at his sides. Not everyone wanted to see the impossible. And that, Maddie thought, was their problem, not hers. That night back at the farm, as Wildfire grazed quietly in the pasture under a rising moon, Maddie sat on the porch swing, the award certificate resting on her lap. Joseph handed her a mug of cocoa and sank down beside her with a sigh. "Looks like we're not invisible anymore," he said with a smile. Maddie laughed softly. "I guess not." Above them, the stars began to prick the sky, one by one. Somewhere out there, new challenges were already gathering. Maddie could feel it, like the faint scent of rain on the wind before a storm. But for now, for this one perfect night, they had won. Together. And tomorrow they would rise again. Because the world had finally heard their whisper. And it was only the beginning. The golden haze of late afternoon bathed the West Farm in soft light. The fields shimmered with new grass, the air rich with the scent of earth and fresh hay. From the paddock, Wildfire watched, ears pricked, as Maddie pinned a laminated sign to the newly painted fence. West Farm Mustang Rehabilitation Center, established 2025. The words looked official, permanent. Joseph leaned on his cane, a glint of pride in his eyes. Looks real good, Maddie girl. Your daddy would have liked it. Maddie turned, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her heart swelling. It's not just mine, she said. It's his too. Yours, Mom's. Everyone who believed we weren't broken. Joseph grunted softly. And everyone who tried to break us. They gave you something too. The fire to prove 'em wrong. Across the yard, Caleb was helping Sarah. Reynolds and a few other volunteers unload feed sacks. Caleb's movements had grown sure and efficient. No longer the arrogant boy from the school hallways, but someone tempered by hard work and hard lessons. Maddie watched them a moment longer, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. What had started with a single terrified moment in a dusty pen was now rippling outward, changing more lives than just hers. Inside the farmhouse, the phone rang. Rachel answered, her brow furrowing briefly before handing it over. For you, she said. It's the National Mustang Association again. Maddie took the receiver carefully. Hello? Maddie West, said the warm voice on the other. And we just saw the footage from the Stonybrook Fair. Unbelievable work. We'd like to formally invite you to Denver next month. Keynote speaker, we want you to talk about your methods. Maddie's heart stumbled in her chest. Me? A keynote? Her voice cracked and she quickly cleared her throat. Yes, you. The woman chuckled kindly. You're leading a quiet revolution, Maddie. It's time people heard you. Maddie promised to think about it and hung up, the receiver feeling strangely heavy in her hand. Joseph watched her closely. What's wrong, girl? That's what you've been working for, ain't it? I know, Maddie said slowly. It's just, when it was just me and Wildfire, it felt simpler, safer. This is bigger. What if I mess up? Joseph chuckled deep in his chest. Messing up's part of the trail. What matters is if you keep riding. He tapped his cane against the porch floor for emphasis. And if folks are looking to you for a new path, well, maybe you're just the one tough enough to blaze it. That night, after chores were done and the house had gone quiet, Maddie slipped out to the paddock. Wildfire was waiting at the fence, his silhouette strong against the rising moon. Maddie leaned her forehead against his, feeling his steady breath against her cheek. They want me to go to Denver, she whispered. Talk to a room full of experts, big people, important people. Wildfire snorted softly, as if unimpressed. You're right. Maddie laughed under her breath. They're just people, same as anyone. The Mustang shifted his weight, bumping her gently with his nose, his silent vote of confidence. Maddie straightened, the fear inside her hardening into resolve. They had come too far to back down now. In the days that followed, preparations swept the farm into a whirlwind. Rachel dug out Maddie's best clothes, brushing them free of dust. Joseph coached her on speaking slow and sure, like you're telling a story round the fire. And Maddie trained, harder than ever, not just with Wildfire, but with Galaxy, Ember, and 2 new Mustangs they'd taken in, Storm and Whisper. Each horse, once labeled dangerous or worthless, responded to her patience, her belief. Just as Wildfire. Had the town buzzed with pride. Local papers ran headlines like "Hometown Hero Heads to Denver." Kids from the high school stopped her in town, not to tease but to shake her hand. Even Sarah Reynolds, working a summer job at the feed store, beamed when Maddie picked up supplies. "You're gonna be amazing," Sarah said shyly. "You already—" And it wasn't lost on Maddie how much could change. Not just horses, but people too, when given a second chance. The morning of the trip, the whole family gathered at the porch to see her off. Joseph handed her a worn leather satchel. Inside, tucked between notes and photos, was the old West family branding iron, unused for years. "Take it," Joseph said simply, "in case you forget who you are out there." Rachel hugged her fiercely, whispering, "Make them see the girl I see every day." And Maddie, with Wildfire's muzzle pressed gently into her side, whispered back, "I'll make you all proud." The car rumbled to life. As they drove down the long dirt driveway, Maddie glanced back through the dust cloud. The farmhouse, the paddocks, Wildfire standing sentinel at the fence line, home. She wasn't leaving it behind, she was carrying it with her, every step of the way. The Denver Convention Center loomed large and glittering against the morning sky, a glass and steel giant that seemed almost to hum with energy. Maddie adjusted the strap of her satchel, nerves twisting her stomach into knots. All around her, polished. Professionals moved with easy confidence. Trainers, veterinarians, researchers. People who, at first glance, looked like they belonged here far more than a girl from a crumbling farmhouse. Rachel squeezed her shoulder gently. "You've earned this, Maddie, more than any of them." Joseph winked, his cowboy hat cocked jauntily. "Go show 'em how we do things in Stonybrook." Maddie nodded, drawing a deep breath. At her side, Wildfire shifted impatiently in his specially prepared travel pen, still the magnificent, untamed soul he had always been, but now tuned to her presence like a heartbeat. The organizers had made special exceptions for Wildfire to be part of her presentation. After all, without him there would be no story to tell. Inside the grand hall, the crowd swelled. Veterans of the Mustang world, government officials, even journalists from national networks. Word about Maddie West, the Mustang whisperer, had spread farther than she ever imagined. She sat backstage, running her fingers lightly over the old branding iron Joseph had tucked into her satchel. A reminder. Strength didn't come from perfection. It came from surviving. The announcer's voice echoed through the loudspeakers. And now, our keynote speaker. A young woman who has redefined what's possible in Mustang rehabilitation. Please welcome Maddie West. A hush fell. Maddie rose, legs steady beneath her despite the pounding of her heart, and walked onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding, the crowd a dark sea. She could have spoken from a script, repeated polished lines prepared by others. Instead, she chose truth. "My name is Maddie West," she began, voice low but unwavering. "And this is Wildfire." Behind her, the big Mustang stepped into view, his coat gleaming under the stage lights. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the audience. "He wasn't supposed to survive," Maddie continued. "Neither was I. Not the way people expected anyway." She told them the story, but not the version polished for headlines. She spoke of fear, of pain, of betrayal, of being thrown into that pen, of staring down death in the shape of a furious Mustang. And then, the moment of understanding that had changed everything. "When the world saw something broken in me," Maddie said quietly, "he saw someone still fighting. And when everyone else saw something dangerous in him, I saw someone just trying to survive." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "That's the thing about Mustangs and people. We aren't meant to be tamed. We're meant to be understood." She moved to Wildfire's side, slipping the halter off in a single, fluid motion. The big horse stood free, muscles coiled, breath steady. Maddie walked across the stage, and without a word, Wildfire followed, step for step, his massive frame, moving with quiet grace beside the girl who had never asked him to submit, only to trust. The silence from the crowd was electric. No fences, no ropes, no tricks, just partnership. Just choice. At the edge of the stage, Maddie turned to face them once more. "My disability didn't disappear," she said. And Wildfire's scars didn't either. But we learned that broken doesn't mean worthless. It just means different, stronger in ways you can't always see. Another breathless pause. And maybe that's the lesson we need to remember for horses and for each other. The applause started tentatively, a ripple. Then it swelled, waves of sound crashing through the grand hall as people stood, many, wiping tears from their faces. Wildfire lowered his head toward Maddie's shoulder, nuzzling her gently, as if he, too, understood the enormity of the moment. Rachel and Joseph rose to their feet along with the rest of the crowd, pride shining from their faces. And somewhere beyond the blinding lights, Maddie thought, Dad's here too, watching, smiling. Afterward, people crowded around her, scientists asking about her methods, journalists begging for interviews, organizations offering partnerships and funding. It was overwhelming. Through it all, Maddie stayed grounded, one hand always resting on Wildfire's warm neck, the other gripping the worn strap of her satchel. Your methods could revolutionize. Therapy, one woman said breathlessly. Have you considered writing a book? A book. The thought was dizzying. Another man leaned in. You're the future of Mustang preservation. We'd like to sponsor your center. Full scholarship if you want to study animal behavior formally. Rachel pressed a steady hand to Maddie's back, whispering, One step at a time, honey. Maddie smiled. One step. Always forward. Late that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the convention lights dimmed, Maddie stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. Wildfire dozed in a nearby travel pen, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Maddie gazed up at the stars, not broken, not less, not lucky, chosen, tested, strong, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge between worlds. Tomorrow there would be contracts to sign, decisions to make, paths to choose. But tonight, there was only this. The quiet certainty that she and Wildfire had found their place in the world. And it was just the beginning. The sun hung low over Stonybrook as Maddie West stood at the edge of the new training arena, clipboard in hand, the air crisp with the bite of approaching fall. The Stonybrook Mustang Rehabilitation Center, the dream she'd barely dared whisper months ago, was real now. Real enough to have funding, real enough to have clients waiting, real enough to attract attention, not all of it welcome. Joseph set down a coil of fencing wire nearby, brushing dust from his jeans. You sure you want to run your first open session tomorrow? He asked, half teasing, half worried. There's a storm brewing. Maddie smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep and stubborn. I know. He wasn't talking about the weather. In the weeks since Denver, the program had gained both admirers and critics. Some called Maddie a miracle worker. Others whispered she was reckless, a danger to herself and others. Fools don't understand what they can't control, Joseph had muttered once. But Maddie understood something deeper. Real change never came without resistance, and it wasn't just words anymore. Last night they'd found the gate to Wildfire's paddock unlatched. A coincidence, the sheriff had said. But Joseph wasn't so sure. Rachel had barely slept, pacing the kitchen into the early hours. Maybe it's too soon, she had murmured more than once. Maybe it's too dangerous. But Maddie had already decided. They wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, the world woke up wrapped in a thick mist. The fields shimmered silver. The barn loomed ghost-like in the half-light. Maddie dressed carefully, every motion deliberate. Her lucky leather boots. The navy work shirt embroidered with the new center's logo. The bracelet her father had given her, worn soft with time. At breakfast, Rachel said little, just pushed scrambled eggs onto Maddie's plate with shaking hands. You don't have to prove anything, she said at last, voice breaking. Maddie looked at her, steady, certain. I'm not doing this to prove something, she said quietly. I'm doing this because it's what I was born to do. By mid-morning, cars began to trickle down the long driveway. Locals first, old ranchers who knew Joseph, young families curious to see the girl they'd read about, then the reporters, then the skeptics. Maddie could feel the pressure thickening. the air like a coming storm. Wildfire paced in his paddock, ears flicking at every unfamiliar sound. She laid a hand on his neck, feeling the shiver of tension beneath his skin. "It's okay," she murmured. "We do this together." As the clock struck 10, Maddie stepped onto the freshly groomed arena. Silence fell across the small crowd gathered at the fence. She faced them, the mic clipped to her collar buzzing faintly in the damp air. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice steady but soft. "We're here today to show what happens when trust, not fear, leads the way." Behind her, the heavy arena gate creaked open. Joseph led in the first Mustang. Thunder, a coal-black gelding with wary eyes and scars tracing his flanks. Thunder had been deemed unadoptable by 3 facilities before Sullivan rescued him. Today, Maddie would be his last chance. She moved slowly, never straight toward him, her posture open, non-threatening. The crowd held its breath. Thunder tossed his head, pawed the earth, a flash of wildness sparking through him. Someone in the crowd murmured. Too low for Maddie to hear, but Joseph stiffened at the words. Should have put it down. Rachel, watching from the sidelines, went pale, but Maddie didn't falter. She waited, breathed, listened. When she finally extended her hand, palm open and low, the black Mustang froze. 1 breath. 2. Then, slowly, Thunder stretched his neck forward, sniffing, testing. His muzzle brushed her fingertips like a whisper. The crowd gasped. A connection, delicate, electric, had been made. "That's it," Maddie whispered. "You choose." She turned and walked slowly away, and the horse, once labeled savage, hopeless, followed, not because he was forced, because he wanted to. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into something thunderous. Joseph whooped, tossing his hat into the air. Rachel wiped her eyes. Even some of the skeptics clapped, their folded arms loosening. But Maddie only had eyes for Thunder. She stroked his neck, tears threatening as she whispered, "You're not broken. You're free." Later, as the last visitors trickled away and the setting sun painted the fields gold, Maddie and Joseph sat on the tailgate of the old truck, watching Wildfire and Thunder graze side by side. Rachel brought out lemonade, her face, tired but lit with something fierce and hopeful. "You did it," she said simply. Maddie shook her head, smiling. "We did. For the first time, the West Farm wasn't just surviving. It was alive again, a place where broken things didn't stay broken, a place where strength wasn't measured by perfection, but by resilience." Above them, stars began to pierce. The deepening twilight. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more doubters, more hard days. But tonight, Maddie felt something unbreakable settle into her bones. A purpose, a calling, a storm may have come. But in its wake, the sunrise was just beginning.